have used Android Studio quite a bit. It's an early access preview IDE from Google. It was announced at last Google I/O. It's built on IntelliJ IDEA 13, the Community Edition, which is was open source, I believe, around 2009. If you haven't used it, it's in your kind of tool set. It would replace ADT, which is built on top of Eclipse, or you could use it alongside as well. But it fits that same role of being your IDE, your code editor, your debugger, all these types of things. And one of the good things about using Android Studio is, especially if you have to be kind of a polyglot developer, meaning you're doing iOS development, maybe you have to do server-side, and you have to do Android. JetBrains, the company who makes IntelliJ, has a lot of IDEs, and if you learn the keystrokes and are familiar with one, it plays pretty well across all of them. They have an iOS one called AppCode, and they have some other ones. So if you have to play across all of them, it's really nice to be able to be familiar with the same IDE across the technologies, and it's a little less jarring than going from Eclipse with ADT to Xcode and back, which are very different environments. So definitely something to check out if you have to regularly go between multiple technology and tool sets. So you can get it on the Android website. They kind of follow a similar model to Chrome. They have like canary builds and dev builds and some beta builds, I guess, so that you, depending on your tolerance for new features versus bugs, you can kind of select your own channel. If you really want a little bit more stable, I found that the IntelliJ Community Edition has most of the features. It doesn't have the Project Wizard the same, and a couple other differences, but it does seem to be a little bit more stable, although it's a little bit behind in features from Android Studio as well. So you may also want to check out the IntelliJ Community Edition. Of course, all these features are also in IntelliJ Ultimate as well. And the Ultimate is a paid tool. You don't get too much more in terms of Android support in the paid tool. You do get JSON support in the Ultimate tools, which is nice if you have to edit JSON files. And you get like a SQLite support if you need to access the SQLite database on your phone. There's that in the paid version of IntelliJ. I don't do too much SQLite work, but when I work with JavaScript or JSON files, it's convenient. So now I'm just going to go through a series of tips and things that I've found in the tools that I found useful. And it's kind of a grab bag. Some of these are Android specific. Some of these apply to all IntelliJ type products and are more general. And will serve you across those products. So there's this thing in the Android toolkit, and I think there may be some support in Eclipse for this as well, but it definitely works in Android Studio, is what's called the tools prefix. So it's an XML namespace you can add to your layout files that gives you certain design time capabilities in the tool. So I have a sample project here. Don't take this as a way to write Android apps. This is purely just sample code, so I can demo some features of the IDE. Open this file here. So you notice here I have. I'm going to turn on. You should be able to see my keystrokes, because one of the things about any IDE, but particularly the IntelliJ IDEs, is if you learn the keystrokes, they'll serve you very well and save you a lot of time. So I have a thing here that shows the keystrokes as I'll try to say them as well, but it'll show them up on the screen. So you can follow around, along with some of the keystrokes I'm hitting. Of course, they're all documented too, so you can look them up. So in this file, there's an XML namespace that you can set up called tools. That will let you modify how the things are rendered in the layout preview. So, for example, I have this my sample application here simulates kind of dynamic data coming over the network by it has a 4-second timeout when the app loads. There's no data, and then like data came in from the network, it shows the data. So that data is not going to be in your layout file because it's dynamic data, and you wouldn't want to hard code it. But not having it in your preview editor is a little inconvenient. So I may want to add tools, text. Right? And so this, you can see over here, now showed up in the preview, so you can see and check out the size of it and how it fits into the layout, but it'll never show up in your production APK by accident if the network fails or whatever. You'll never accidentally see this placeholder text. So it's a design time only thing. Now this is text is an attribute on, because it extends test view, but you can actually use it for any object, any attribute on your layout XML. So if I duplicate this and then I just type tools, you can see at design time I can make it 50, which makes it much bigger over here. But in the real app, it's still going to be 20. And you can override anything there by just putting tools XML namespace before it. There's a couple other things you can do. If you have a list item or a list view, you can specify like what each row in the list view might look like, so that the layout preview will give you a better preview there. And 0.5.8, which just came out, they have a new show in attribute where you can say like this is a little layout that's a part of going to be rendered as part of it, included in a bigger layout, and so you can kind of give it the context of where it should show you in the layout preview. And I think you have to have the latest to use that feature. They're documented on the Android website. There's a bunch of other ones, so go check those out. There's also a thing you can do here called is in edit mode. And sometimes things don't quite work right in the layout preview, and you might want to tweak them in your code. Like this has some custom fonts used here. I use Roboto Thin. But sometimes you get some errors if you set a custom typeface in the layout preview. So you can say if it's not in edit mode, set the custom text, and then in the layout preview, it won't try to set the custom text. So again, that's kind of a way to write code that's kind of design time only. So here's just a quick tip. If you have multiple devices, it says choose a running device. You can actually choose multiple running devices, which, unless you click multiple and see that you can select them, may not be obvious. But if you select a subset of the devices that ADB can see, it'll build and deploy that APK just to that selected subset. And then you can say use the same device or devices for future launches, and it will always just launch to that subset of devices, which there's a lot of devices we all have to test on as Android developers. So being able to push to multiple APKs as in your development cycle is very useful. I have 2 Android emulators running here. I'm going to try to push to both. I have already selected. So in this case, I didn't set a debugger, so it didn't attach in this case to either because I didn't choose debug mode. If I want to go to multiple, I'll show you a feature. Actually, I was going to show it later, but I'll show it now. Simulators. I'm not quite showing this. So I actually had previously chosen use same device, so it didn't pop up the dialog. So if now you can see I can select one, both individually. And this is just a run configuration, not a debug configuration. So if I run them in both, see, I just have this little icon that animates, and then text comes in after 4 seconds, so it's simulating dynamic text, but you don't see the hello that I typed in, because that was a tools-only tip. To answer your question, if I wanted to pick one, you can use this to pick and attach a debugger to just one device that's running after the fact. And that can be a device or anything that ADB can see. So another cool feature, and this is not specific to Android, but can be very useful, is a thing called inject language. So here I have some, there's a from HTML method in Android. You might use it to make some text bold. If you noticed in the UI, welcome was bolded. And this just creates a span that you can put in the text view and it'll show up. But you may want to do something more when you're editing this HTML. So you can use, there's kind of this magic keystroke, which just pops up the relevant contextual options in IntelliJ products called, in my key map, it's Alt-Enter. So here I can do inject language, and I can say HTML. So you can see it now puts on syntax highlighting there. So it knows that this is HTML, and the code completion does the right thing for being HTML, which is very useful. You can also do edit HTML fragment. So for things like if you want to do a backspace T in Java, you need to escape that. So you notice here that it has 2 backspaces because it's in a Java string, so it needs to be escaped. Where here I can just kind of edit it as if it were a separate HTML file. And I only have to put 1, so you can kind of think in HTML and edit it down here, but it's getting a little too unwieldy to edit as a Java string. You know, you can argue whether it's good to put HTML and Java strings at all. But another one I have here is this is a text.utils.split. Takes a regex as the separate option. And the other nice thing is it will always remember now that it's setting that the first argument from HTML is HTML. So all the times I call that API across my project, it'll remember that. And here I'm going to say inject regex. So now you can see it changed the syntax highlighting. And with regex, you can actually do this thing, check regex. It'll pop up a little menu. And this is just a splitter on the text that's going to match any one character. So it matches that. And you can test text against the regular expression to see what matches and what doesn't when you're trying to debug a regular expression. In another use case, it's not probably officially supported, but does actually work, is to do the animation, I'm using the Object Animator API, which reflectively modifies properties. So this scale factor is actually a property of this class, but you pass it in as a string, so I can't manipulate it as if it was a property. But if you inject Groovy as the language there, some of the things will work. So it'll now know that that's a property. If I do the pop-up, it'll show me it's a private float and what it's set to. And if you do Command B, oops, I've lost my keystrokes here. It'll take you to the declaration. So kind of a hack, but at least it works right now. So just a quick note, there's some Android-specific code style settings. So if you want your XML to look like Android XML, it does that by default. If you want to modify that, there are some code style settings that you can set and then share in your code style file if you have a shared file across your team. Make sure you all have the same code style. So we did this. This is from our one of our recent releases of our apps. This little animation lets you track how you're doing against earning some extra points on your card. Getting this animation to be smooth on lots of devices was a little bit of a challenge. So I used a tool called TraceView, which is integrated into Android Studio, and it makes it really easy to dive in, especially if you're having kind of a janky animation, if you need to smooth it out and figure out why certain frames are taking too long to render. This is a great tool. So you can notice here that there's animation going on here. So I'm going to open up a trace view. So I open up the Android window, and Nexus 4 emulator. So I'm going to pick the Nexus 4 emulator. I'm going to pick this Android Studio Tips process. There's a little thing down here. It looks like a stopwatch. Once you pick the process, it'll start method tracing. So I'm going to click this on that process. Okay, so now it's collecting data on what's going on inside that process. And I'm going to click it again. So there you can see it popped up here. With a method trace. So basically this allows you to dive into every frame. If you see there's kind of a repeated pattern here, this is every frame of the animation. So if you're seeing something that looks out of place or it doesn't look quite right, you can dive down, and my custom thing that's doing the animation is the Android icon class, which I created, and it has an on-draw method. So I can see all the things that are so there's a low drawable here that's taking a lot of time during the animation. So I may want to look at why that's taking time, or maybe do object allocations or other things that are slowing down or causing garbage collection during your animation. But it just allows you to dig in, and of course it works for other things besides animations, but just allows you to see where the time is being spent visually, and then there's a lot of details in terms of implications and time down below. And it's really easy with Android Studio. You just click a button, point it to your process, and then start your finding out what you need to optimize. So key maps. I use a Mac. If you use a Mac, I highly recommend, especially if you're new to Android Studio, choosing the Mac OS 10.5 Plus key map. It feels much more natural to a Mac user. Command W closes a tab. Command O opens something. Command N is something new, right? Something you're familiar with as a Mac user. So definitely start with that key map if you're going to learn intelligent key maps. There are a bunch of key maps if you really don't want to learn one, although I encourage you to just learn the intelligent key map. If you really need Vim support, there is a plugin for that. It gives you modal type of Vim editing. I've tried that a couple times over the years. I always end up giving it up and just going with the IntelliJ key maps. It also gives you a little statistics on how much time it's saving you. So as of taking this, it said that it saved me at least 44,000 characters from using autocomplete. And it also tells you how many times you use different things. I use code completion a lot, so I just use this to pick a few things to kind of demo, and these are things I use a lot because it keeps track of stats on that. So go to declaration is very basic, but I use it a lot. It's very useful, so if you're not familiar with it. The nice thing about IntelliJ is one concept, like go to declaration, works intelligently in lots of contexts and across, whether you're doing Ruby or iOS or any of the other JetBrains products. The same things will work in those contexts. So, for example, if I'm here, I can do go to declaration, which is Command B in my key map. And it'll take me actually inside the Android source code to the find view by idea in activity, and then I can go back to my last edit position. It does the right thing. So while welcome message is actually part of the R class, which is code generated, and it's a static final int, going to see the int value would be really annoying if you went to go to declaration, it took you there. Fortunately, it is smart enough to take you to where you actually want to go, which is where it's defined with a plus ID, which creates a new ID, right? So that same kind of concept of go to declaration, and that keystroke serves you well in all sorts of contexts. The next one I'm going to talk about is syntax-aware selection. So syntax-aware selection in my key map is Alt up and down. And basically, whatever context you're in, it's going to know syntactically what are the next larger chunks and allow you to select that with just a few keystrokes. So I'm just hitting repeatedly up and down, and you can see it's going smaller and larger syntactic selections. So if you, rather than having to reach the mouse and drag exactly what you want, usually you want to drag in some syntactically meaningful manner or select that. And then you can manipulate it however you see fit. So for example, if I select this one, it'll select that whole method for me. And then you can do something like Command-Shift, which moves the method. You can see it's smart enough that even if I move that, it knows like a method can't go in another method. So it'll just pop it down below that method. And it does a similar thing in XML. It'll move the XML in the right way and do this syntactic selection. So that, again, that same concept works in lots of contexts. Oh, good question. So if you come up here, you guys see, so it's up in the help. If you go up to help, then you go down, project is good. Let's see. I switch back and forth between this and intelligence. It's probably even higher statistics than that in terms of time and saving. So introduce variable refactoring. Again, that's not specific to Android, but it's really useful. So if I want to do, sometimes when you're typing, you just want to kind of get your concept on there, and then you want to make it nice later. That introduce variable refactoring can help you do this. If you just put the cursor somewhere and do, in my key map, it's Command-Alt-V, it'll actually pop down a list of all the possible things you might want to make a variable out of, and then it'll make the right type of variable for that thing. So if I do it there, that's going to be a type string, that's going to be a span, and it's smart enough to know that at the welcome message.setText, it returns void, so you want to make that into a variable. So if it doesn't give me any option there, it goes right to a runnable, which is kind of the next expression. So it only does expressions and not statements, essentially. So I can say, from HTML, and it's going to make a span variable there from that. You can also just select something, so it's smart enough to know, like if I put something in a text string, but I now want to make that dynamic or introduce it, so I can just select this part I'm going to replace with something dynamic, or want to make it a variable. I can do extract variable there. That gives you a sensible default of what you might want to call that. And so it'll create a variable, and it'll introduce the right string concatenation so that it's still syntactically valid. Java. Then you can even go further if you like to use the format method, and it gives you a nice little option to string that format. So now put that back into one string with a %s. And if you don't like to look at the string dot, you can just say add static import. And then you've got, looks nicer. I don't know why it's split format and split, but and the last one I think is complete statement. So I just have a little example down here. So sometimes you just end up with a statement that's missing something on the end, a semicolon, parenthesis. In this case, I'm missing 3 characters. I'm missing a quote, close a string. I'm missing a parenthesis, close a method call, and I am missing a semicolon to end the statement. So if I do Command-Shift-Enter, you can notice it took the cursor all the way to the end, and it added those 3 characters just by looking at what's needed to make that syntactically valid. So it's just a nice, complete the rest of this for me. It knows the syntax. It just kind of does the right thing. So there's a number of cool things you can do with the debugger. I already showed you how you can attach to a running process. So one of the cool things is you can, it's not specifically related to debugging, but if you're trying to find out why your app's acting a certain way, sometimes it's very useful to be able to look at the Android source code. Now you can go to GitHub or GoogleSource.com and kind of browse through there, but it's a little funky. So if you make sure that the source code is attached correctly for the version that you're running in, you can kind of debug into the Android source code. You know, it's want to be aware, obviously, of basing your code on anything that's undocumented, because that would break. But you know, sometimes you just want to know, how is this really working, and looking at the Android source code can help you there. So you can attach source code. Let's see. This is not a Gradle project, so this is a Maven project. So this dialog looks slightly different, but it allows me to attach source when I pull in a Maven dependency. And really, you want the source to match wherever you're going to debug on, right? So if I'm going to debug on API 19 device, I want the port source or whatever. There's sources that come with the Android SDK. If you need to get more specific, you can always download AOSP with Git, and then select the right tag and point the source to there to get a more specific version of the source if you need to get there. And that allows you to kind of through. You can debug down into that source, assuming you have the right version that matches what's running on your device. So I have if I use a bitmap drawable here, now sometimes you want to, this is bitmap drawable, this is part of the Android source code. Sometimes you can set a breakpoint, which will stop if the line numbers in the source version you have match up with the line numbers of the version you're running. It'll actually catch the breakpoint. You can inspect and look at the variables. Sometimes you wish you could just put a print line in there so you can see, like, in an animation, how is this thing evolving over time. What you can do in that case is you can actually say don't suspend. So you edit the breakpoint to say don't stop when you get to this breakpoint, but instead just log an evaluated expression. So in this case, I might just want to say what bitmap to say this. It's in bitmaps. Oops. It's just a Java expression, bitmap. In bitmap, it gives you nice code completion in the little dialog. Let's say done there. I'm going to attach the debugger to the running process, and you can see it's actually hitting that, and then of course somebody's going to hit that. So you can see it's printing out. So you actually, in the Android source code, you attach the right version, and you can kind of essentially have the equivalent of print statements inside the Android source code to see what's going on. Some other stuff you can do with the debugger is there's a lot of advanced things where you can have it only trigger the debug based on a class builder, so only when it's in my class, right? I don't want to trigger it when it's outside my code. You only want it to hit once and then removed. Sometimes you're like, this problem only happens after I get to this point, and you don't want to have to hit run, run, run. So you can actually have a bunch of breakpoints that all just get enabled once you hit a certain breakpoint. So if you have multiple breakpoints, I can say, okay, when you hit this breakpoint, enable all these other breakpoints, which can be really useful for the certain type of debugging session. The other useful thing is sometimes you want to figure out where an exception is being thrown. You can, this can be a little bit dangerous, but you can actually say just break on any Java exception. You'll find that there's a lot of class net found exceptions and things like that. So you may need to use these filters to say only break on exceptions thrown within my code. So you're not seeing all these exceptions that are thrown and catched within the framework. So another thing that is useful is sometimes you have some code that you want to debug that's in your application.onCreate, or if you have a custom test runner that overrides the instrument test runner or extends that, and you have something in the onCreate there, and it runs very early when your process is started, but you want to hit a debugger, you might wonder why the debugger breakpoint never gets hit, because it seems to be some sort of race condition between the application starting and the debugger attaching to the process. So you can do this thing, you might have saw it earlier, where I had in settings, there's a thing called wait for debugger. So you can select an app. So I have my demo activity selected. And if I say wait for debugger, before it executes any of my code, it's just going to pause. And it's going to wait for the debugger to attach. And then you can basically hit those earlier breakpoints. You don't want to leave this enabled all the time, because then if you just want to run your app, you hit the icon to run it, and the app doesn't run because it's waiting for a debugger. So you only want to really do this when you need to debug code that executes, immediately after the app starts, and and you're not catching it when you're just attaching. So this is my test rig, and one of my test rigs in our office. You can see there's actually a Mac Mini under here that runs tests with Spoon and loads up all these devices. So they're always going off anytime there's a commit these tests on them. Just want to time check. What time? How much? 20 minutes. Excellent. So I just have a demo activity here. So one nice thing is Android tests can be, especially instrumentation tests, can be kind of slow if you ever use them. So sometimes for example, in our test rig there, we have over 300 tests that are always running, and I just want to know, why is this test always failing? So out of all those, one or two might be failing, and so I get the report after the build, and I want to just hook up to the local device, run just that test case. So I can usually go to the Spoon report, or however you get your logs from your test cases, copy and paste the test name that we have, do something like a Command-Alt-O, which is just inter-symbol name. If you just paste the test name, it'll find that test. Find that test and open that test. Now you can run all of the tests in that class fairly easily by doing, in my key map, a Command-Alt-R, which pops up this little dialog. So you want to make sure that you run the one with the little Android symbol, otherwise it tries to create a configuration for plain JUnit tests, which is not going to work, because it's not going to know to run it on your device, and it's just going to try to run it with the regular Android jar, which is not going to work. But you can create an Android test configuration, either in run or debug. You can just save it, or you can kind of make it a temporary one by just hitting run. Go off and try to run that on the device. You can also, if you have a lot of test methods in your class, you can just put it on one test method and do a similar keystroke of Command-Alt-R, and then you can just do that one specific method. And so it will build your APK, load the APK under tests, load the instrumentation APK, and then invoke just that one method. By default, actually, if you see it says debug up here, so it actually will, and a lot of times that's what you want. You want to load that test and then step through that test and debug and see where it went wrong. Sometimes you just want to run it first, just to kind of watch the UI, especially the GUI-based test. If you go over here and pick run, it'll just run it. Otherwise, the default, if you just hit 2, if you notice the 2 number is there, if you hit Shift 2, that's just a shortcut to run. So usually I'll pop up this menu and hit Shift 2, and it does the right thing. It'll run what I want in run mode, and then you can, it'll save that configuration up under your configurations menu, and then you can kind of go up there and pick from the different ones you've triggered. Oh, another tip is when you're creating either test configurations or application configurations, I prefer to set clear log before launch by default. These are all just the defaults. These are actually usually your configurations. So I come in here and say clear log before launch so that it clears the ADB. So if you're looking at ADB, you never have that thing like, oh, is this from the previous run, from the current run? I set that as the default. Occasionally maybe you don't want that, but I find that I almost always want it to just clear the logs so I can start fresh and make sure that, you know, if I get the exception again, I'm not thinking I still got the exception when it was actually from the previous run. And where you've actually fixed it. So well-crafted commits. So this, again, is not Android specific.
You also run a unit test on Android from within Android Studio itself?
Yes, so that's what I was. That's what I was showing there. So you're talking just plain Java unit tests, instrumentation tests, or?
No, just plain like a test case versus Android.
I suppose it depends on. I mean, do you have a separate Java project? No. So it's a Java unit test in an Android project using Gradle or Maven or Gradle. It's probably some of the Android Studio guys are here, so it's probably a great question for them. So maybe save that one. That's a great question. So well-crafted commits. So a lot of times what I'll do is, you know, I know what command my build server is going to run on my code, so I'll, right before I commit, I'll do a, you know, Gradle clean build check or something like that because I know that's going to be run on my build server and I don't want to break the build, so I want to make sure that I run that same command on my project before I commit. So while that's running, which in some depending on how many sub-projects, how big your APK is, and how many things you have tied to the check task, can take a little bit of time. So what I'll usually use that time is while that's running and making sure that my commit is good from a build point of view is I'll come down here, I'll look at all my changes. So let's say these are all the changes that I have. And the version control integration and IntelliJ products is really one of the reasons to use them. When you merge, it's a great UI for merging code and things like that. So in this case, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to hit this little debug icon, or not debug, diff icon up here. So it's going to show me a diff of everything that's selected. So I select all, and I hit a diff. And now there's some keystrokes where you can very easily kind of go through each class. So I'm going back and forth through all the files that have changed, right? And within each class, some classes have multiple things, multiple changes. So I'm hitting F7, and F7 takes me change by change. So I make sure that I don't miss anything, and Shift F7 takes you back up. So I can go file by file, back and forth, and change by change in each file. And then you notice there's a commit message thing down at the bottom. So as you're going, you can kind of take notes and say, like, oh, I changed this because of this reason. I changed this because of this reason. I make a very nice, crafted, well-crafted commit so you, your fellow teammates stay on their good side. You can also, like, if you see something like, oh, I really didn't mean to check this in. You know, I commented out this line for whatever I was trying. You can actually just write in line, edit that, and say, no. Don't do that. Now, you probably want to go back and run the build thing again, make sure it still builds and check patches again if you modify anything here. But it's better than checking in something that's commented out that really shouldn't be. And actually, if you stay on the right side over here, which is actually the version that's going to be committed, as opposed to the version it was based off of, you actually get code completion and all these things here. So you can actually just use this as a little editor. You can see here, it gives me the code completion and all these things right in there. So I can make sure that whatever I'm changing is, you know, I get the nice editor features and comfort. And if I, you know, anything that I see where I'm like, oh, this really I wanted this public. So I can actually take changes and bring them back from what it was based on, and revert it back and say, oh, I want all these to be public, so I just did that, that, and that. Now I brought in, from what this is the git hash of the previous version, it brings them forward to my version. So I don't know if you guys have ever done it, but sometimes you accidentally change something, forget to change it back, and then end up committing that, which can be bad. So in my key map, it's Command-Shift square bracket to go one way, and the others, the starting square bracket to go the other way. It's the Mac 10.5 plus key map for Mac. So on Windows, it might be slightly different. If you use the Mac 10 OS, it might be slightly different. Linux, no. So, and again, you can always pick a key map and change things. The Mac 10 OS .5 plus first fine. So VCS annotations is, again, just a general IntelliJ thing where sometimes you're wondering where a line of code came from. So you can right-click there. I don't know if you saw what I did, but you can right-click in the gutter and say annotate, and it's going to show you all the commits, when they happened, what username did them, and then a little commit. You can hover over every line, line by line, and then you can see, like, oh, this guy wrote that line of code, and then go talk to him, walk over and talk to him and ask him why you wrote that line of code, right? Sometimes it's really interesting if there's not good comments or you just have questions related to when it was written, why it was written. And then again, if you write good comments, if you do good commit messages and take notes, then you have a much better commit message than this, and maybe they explain why they made that change. So you can see, go back and see, and if you use some sort of issue tracking system, you might have a JIRA tag in there. You can go back and look at the issue, why this line was changed, when it was changed, and kind of do a little history there on where it came from. So another thing you can see, if you use the version control integration, you can set it to poll your, so this is like from that version, you can actually use it to poll your source control system. And if you're in a file that somebody else has recently checked into on the same branch or trunk or whatever, it'll actually say, you're using an outdated version, so you know, like, I'm going to get equal changes, or at least I should look what this other guy's doing. Why is he modifying the same file I'm modifying? Who modified it? So you give you the, it's been masked like the innocent here, who was editing this file, when they edited it, and it'll actually give you the version, with their commit message, and you can actually just show a diff if you want to see, like, what did they change, or if you want to say, just bring in their changes, put them on top of my file, and you say, update project, and pull in all the changes. So that way, you get to know as soon as possible if somebody else is modifying this thing, and that you can hopefully avoid some merge hassles.
Is the update to a rebase, or does it just go?
The update?
Yeah, does it do a rebase?
A rebase? So this screenshot was taken with a subversion integration. So that would just pull it in. And good question. When it does Git, I'm not sure what it looks like for Git. We use subversion. So. Diffs. So the diff support that I showed you, that works in a lot of contexts, not just when you're committing, but actually when you're pulling in new code. If you want to go through the history and look at the log, this is Git, but I can look through the history here and kind of deep dive into a commit and see what was committed in these different things, and I can again use that same command, same diff dialog to kind of go through, step through each change, really understand the commit that came in. Great for code reviewing and things like that. Understanding a commit. And it has a great, when a merge comes in, if there's conflicts, it has a pretty nice kind of three-way viewer where you can kind of pick from your code and their code, and they'll automatically merge the ones that don't conflict, and then kind of highlight the ones that do, and then save it for you. So very helpful in that respect. One thing I can tell you is in file issues, anytime I'm thinking about something or I wish it would do something, of course they're not all going to get fixed, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Be like, hey, you created this, you can file it, or you think it's a bug, put in, hey, when I do this, it does this, and so it makes it better for all of us. You guys file more feature requests, more bug requests, reports, then maybe the fix is going to be better. So I would encourage you to file issues. I file issues. Doesn't take that much time, but do put a little bit of thought into it. If you come up here and hit the submit feedback, it'll pop up that issue tracker, and then you can pick the right type, and it'll pre-populate your build info, so everything know what build you're running. We use Maven for our current build, although we're looking to switch to Gradle. It has excellent support for Maven. So if you use Maven for your Android projects, definitely check it out. Obviously, the new Gradle support, if you're thinking of switching something, is definitely something to look at. So another handy thing that you can do, and a lot of editors and decent editors have this, but it's kind of one of those things you rarely use, but when you do it, you're very glad that it's an editor. So it's column select. So I just put it into column select mode with Shift Command F8. Shift Command 8. So you can see that goes into column mode, which allows me, if I wanted to, say, change all those to private, I can select in column mode and type in that way. Again, you don't use it all the time, but when you do need it, it can be very handy. Another one that's recently added, I think at 13.1 version of IntelliJ, is the ability to So you can add multiple places where the cursor is active. So if you look here, there's lots of cursors blinking. Maybe you don't want to do it just like this, but I had a bunch of methods the other day, and I needed to change the type in a bunch of methods. I just was able to click, 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 click in all these methods and highlight and change, even though it wasn't sequential rows. And then you can just hit double escape to get out of that. So sometimes you need to make the same edit in a number of places. We really, you don't use it that often, but when you need it, it can just save you a lot of time. So if I have another one here is introduce parameter is really useful. Maybe I wanted to make this in a reusable method that always says welcome to whatever I pass in. So I can do, first I'll do extract method, which is Command-Alt-M. And it gives me options on what I want to extract into a method. Let's say it's just that. So I'll hit that. Ask me which class I want to put it in. On Anonymous, I'll put it at the top level class. I'll call it welcome. And there's also a rename, which is Shift F6. It gives you welcome. But also, there's another nice one that you notice it's underlined in green. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's actually spell check. So you can do Alt-Enter, and it'll actually do the spelling for you. So correct it, and of course it corrected it at the invocation site as well. But now, of course, this is not very useful. It doesn't take a parameter. It always says welcome to the same name. So if I do introduce parameter, which is Command-Alt-P, I can say I want to make dynamic name a parameter. It puts dynamic name 1, so it doesn't shadow the built-in field. So I'll hit that. Now it put it as a parameter, and you notice it inserted what was the value before up in the call segment here. So it also compiles and still uses this as the same value. So now, if I wanted to, in some other context, I have a method that takes it with a few keystrokes. I've extracted that to a method, and I can use it in another context. So there's a number of sources and resources on the internet that I use to pull this stuff from, and I can put these online if you guys are interested in terms of what's there. But that's all I have to do. Sure. Yeah. I know that. Yeah, I know that some of the guys who actually work on Android Studio here, so they might have more intelligent answers to some of your questions. So, you guys, I don't know if you guys want to come up and volunteer some information.
We have about 30 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if you guys have questions for me. I can stay up or I can hang out with these guys or whatever.
Actually,
what do you want to do?
Quick question of everybody here, since you guys have stayed this long. So raise your hand if you got a ticket to I/O. Anyone? Whoa, pretty good. You did pretty good. I didn't get one. Okay, so those of you who didn't, raise your hand if you'd be interested in attending an I/O extended. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, does anybody not know what I/O extended is? Basically, it's a thing that people do, and we haven't done one yet. We're talking about maybe doing one this year. But for people who didn't get into I/O, we get a space maybe here, and we get together and we watch it remotely. That's basically all it is. So, we'll watch maybe the keynote, or we'll pick out, a couple of sessions, and so it's something we're kind of talking about it, but who would be interested in that? Okay. All right. Stay tuned. Is it BYOB? Kevin, are you buying the beer?
Well, I'm sure it'll be like nasty pizza and.
Let's talk about it. We'll talk about it. Stay tuned. We got one more meetup before then, so hopefully we'll get everything ironed out. So, anyway, we got guys from the I/O team. You want to introduce yourselves to everybody, and then we'll just do a sort of general Q&A.
Hello, I'm Xavier Ducroy. I'm the lead for the developer tools for Android at Google. So Studio, Creator, Emulator, Eclipse, Editing, and things like that.
I'm Scott Hart. I'm a developer for developer tools, concentrating almost exclusively on Android Studio.
Hey, I'm Jay. I'm the product manager on the SAE tools in Android Studio.
Actually, we had another question earlier that was kind of interesting about the article. These are perfect guys to ask.
Let me stop you right there. No comment.
These guys would be fired if they answered that question.
Yeah. I told you. So it's probably not
I'll stop them before they answer. I don't want to be fired.
So the question was, is there any reason why it's based on Studio is based on IntelliJ rather than Eclipse? I mean, that was a great demo. We think that IntelliJ is a really good IDE. Eclipse is a really good platform for plugins. In terms of actual IDE support, it's a little bit less, we think. And we think we're going to be able to build a much better product on top of IntelliJ. And so that's why we decided to do IntelliJ. Yes.
Like the new features they get loaded to like like this event.
So the question is about the advantages of Studio versus the Ultimate version. So we work very closely with JetBrains. They pull their or plug in directly into their version, and we pull their platform into Studio. Like for example, 058 brings it back to like the latest EAP that they have for 13.1. So really, the advantages are going to be, if you need some of the features from Ultimate, you should use Ultimate. Like there's a lot of advanced features like JSON support and things like that. SQLite and things like that. I mean, specifically for Android, there isn't that many. Like SQLite is one of them, but there's a lot of backend features that you may want to use. If you're just purely doing Android, I think the experience in Studio would be much more targeted specifically toward Android, so you won't have like options for like groovy things or whatever that you won't care about. Right? So it's just whether you need the extra features or whether you just want a dedicated Android experience. So the question is whether you'll be able to stay on Eclipse or you have to switch by the deadline or whatever. There won't be any deadline. Right now we're focusing a lot of the effort on Studio to bring it to 1.0. And then, I think we're going to focus a lot on Studio to bring it all the way to Eclipse. And that's all we can announce at that time, but you can still use Eclipse right now if you want. We're never going to tell you, we're not going to remove anyway Eclipse from the download, and you have it installed already, so there's no way for us to stop you using it. Right? So you can keep using it. Maybe the community will pick up. I think there's already some things that are painful to do with Eclipse, not because of Eclipse itself, but because, like if you're trying to do multiple APKs, for example, it's just very difficult because Ant and Eclipse are not really designed for, not Eclipse itself, but the builder inside Eclipse is not designed for it. So when we designed the Gradle-based build system, we are trying to fix some of those issues. So there's a lot of features in the Gradle-based build system that are really to try to help developers that are very complex applications set up, but are trying to push like different versions of their application. They want to push multiple APKs for ABI reason, for example, and those are just very trivial to use. And if you have an application that becomes bigger and bigger and have some of those issues, switching will really help you. So we're not, it's like, and then at some point I just realized that Studio has better feature, more advanced feature, because it's a lot easier for us to do them there and do them in Eclipse. So you can answer just switch. There was some question back there.
I looked at the live now, when you looked at it earlier, we had a lot of old projects, 40 pieces of projects that still need to be maintained. It's a bit of a pain, and not taking.
So the question is about like dealing with all projects from Eclipse. Are you trying to keep the project also building in Eclipse and in Studio, or just migrating them? All right. So early on.
Sure. I work on the Chromecast team. We make samples for the public. We make them run in multi-use. So we should start with the project, and then take the Gradle file and modify the source folder location to be like a non-major, so it looks like it does. And then the project can run both. Because, when we make samples, we want people to do both, and it does a great job. So even if you kind of wants to start out and not really sure, that's a good option.
But if you don't want to do that manually, when we introduced Studio last year, we didn't really have a good story for that. But since maybe 2 or 3 months ago, Studio is able to import Eclipse project, and we try a lot of different things, including like reading the Eclipse workspace files to try to figure out what your project structure is and things like that. So you should try it and see if that helps or not. It may not be guaranteed to support everything because there are some worse things that you can do in your workspace that will make it fail, but you should try that. So, bug tracking process. It's a good question. There's definitely some things where we just don't see the bug, and we just, there's a lot of bugs coming in through the bug tracker because it's the general tracker for all of Android. So sometimes we just miss them. So it's possible that this bug in particular was fixed independently of seeing your bug, and then we saw it and like, oh yeah, we just fixed that 2 weeks ago or whatever. You know, we should put comments saying when it was fixed anyway. We rarely do mention that, hey, we're going to start working on that bug because, you know, it's like I can tell you today that, yeah, I'm going to start working on that bug and something will happen tomorrow, and it turns out I can't actually fix it for a few weeks, and then you come and say, it's like, hey, did you fix it yet? Did you fix it yet? Right? So we prefer not to tell you exactly, hey, I'm starting to work on it, or hey, I'm halfway through, or, you know. So we have several stages, right? We have the biggest one, our future release in the bug tracker, which means that we fixed it internally, but we haven't released it yet. And then there's release, which means that the release that contains that bug has been released. So that's really the 2 main stages that you can look at. So there is technically a priority label, but the priority is very fluid and it depends on a lot of things, and so we don't use it too much. We should start using it more, but it's, you know, we haven't really done a super awesome job about that. So,
yeah, so I had 2 questions. The first question was what I asked previously. If I want to run
unit test, right?
yes.
Yeah. So Maven supports Roboelectric. We don't yet. We do want to support Roboelectric. There is a third-party plugin that sort of allow you to run Roboelectric with Gradle. I'm sort of working with those people when I have time to try to open up access point to you know, plugin to make it easier for their plugin to connect with it with ours. But it's just a work in progress. Hopefully, we'll have some improvement in the next few months, but nothing really to announce right now.
I'm not even talking about the Roboelectric, I'm talking about your test, so like test cases versus Android test cases, the ones that come built into Android. The problem is currently when I run it through Android Studio, it actually spins up the whole Android, it goes to the Android source. So that it takes time, even if it's your JUnit reset.
Yeah, because we can't really, so the question is about running just pure JUnit tests, not on Android. The problem is that it's kind of difficult for us to know that that particular class or that particular test really doesn't need any of the Android APIs, and so could safely run on the device. Like your class may be okay to run on the device, but if you're on that particular test, but you may have another test in the same class that does reference an Android class, and then if you try to load that on the Debian, it's just not going to run. So in reality, I think you would have very few cases where, you know, you can really safely run that and load that particular class and all its dependencies on a JVM without actually having a problem. So Roboelectric is meant to fix that, right? Where you do run Android on that. So if it is in a plain Java library, yes, you will be able to run that just as a regular JVM test. The problem that you're going to have right now is that I don't think that we support running that from Studio. So you can run that on the command line if you have a pure Java Gradle project. It's something that we need to do where you can from Studio run the test. We are actually working with a Gradleware company to try to get access to running those tests through the tooling API. But we'll be able to do that in the future. So if you have really pure Java stuff, I would recommend trying to do a pure Java project for them.
I have two questions. One is regarding small startup that people can but when are when can we expect that Android to provide like in 6 days or out of the faster than the second question is why is it easy to actually walk the
Yes. So, yeah. It's a good question. So for the emulator, I mean, our solution long term is x86 system images with Axum and with the GPU rendering. So Axum is there. You know, Intel. We work with Intel for them to do it. The x86 system images, it's something that we need to work on and provide those out of the box as, you know, quickly as we provide the M1, basically. Our goal is to, you know, when the next version of Android is released, to have an x86 images at the same time. So that the default would actually be to run the x86 system images just for speed reasons. GPU also is something that we're working on. It's it's there, it's working. It's not enabled by default because there's some graphic card and chipset combination out there, driver combination out there that are just not completely compatible. So we're working through that. But our goal is to have basically that combination of x86 and GPU be as fast as Genymotion because there's no reason it shouldn't be. And ADB is work in progress. We're aware of that. I'm hiring. So ADB, when you launch it from the command line, ADB will basically spawn a daemon that runs on your host machine, and that as a server, yeah, that will monitor any emulators that you may not be launching, and monitor also your USB connection to Discover devices. And then whether you're running from Studio or from the command line, when you type actually some command on the command line like ADB devices or ADB logcat, the ADB command line actually connects to the ADB server running on the same machine, and if it's not there, it creates it, and then talks to the devices. USB stacks on various OSs are more or less stable. On some OSs, they are less stable than others. And there's a lot of threads and connection going on there, and there is some stability issue that we're working through. I have no idea. Just to give you an idea, we knew about KitKat literally like a week before it was announced. We had a K name before that, and we knew it was not the final one. We discovered that it was KitKat. Something for it. We actually don't know. Questions? All right, no questions. What do you mean by the free TVJs? Well, so Studio is really just a different distribution of IntelliJ. So what we take is that we take the base platform, which is the community edition, or it's open source. We take that. We put the Android plugin in it, which the community edition actually also is packaged with the Android plugin, and we put our own branding on it, and we have control over changing some of the menus and things like that to hide the stuff that's not relevant for Android. So that's really all it is. So if you take Ultimate, what you get is the same platform plus extra plugin for JSON, for like JavaScript, whatever, all those backend Java ED stuff, plus the Android plugin. So you really have everything that you have in the Studio version. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So currently in Android Studio, I want to shift between build types and variants. Like I have an actual separate dialog and I have to keep shifting. The problem is it doesn't give me the correct context. If I have certain files that are custom to a particular flavor of build, then it just builds perfectly well. But then when I switch, I realize everything's broken because it doesn't get out the context. Is there like a shift to sort of like keep it parallel? Because at the previous point, I remember Android Studio was like recognizing multiple processes, then it was removed to be more reflective of true Gradle file. Is there like a push again? Maybe like what do you want?
So a couple of things. The first one is that IntelliJ doesn't really understand the concept of variants that we have because it's very unusual. So we work to try to add that so that at least the indexer will be able to tell you about some of the errors that you may have before you compile, right? Because that's what IntelliJ does. It indexes all your code, and when it finds errors, it shows them without having to compile. So right now, it only does it on the current variant and not on the other ones. So the goal is to change that so that it will also show that on the other one. But really, if you don't have that, the only way to do it really is just to build everything. For speed reason, when you make or when you go to the project menu, it only builds the current variant. I think, do we have like a menu to build everything, every variant?
You can do the Gradle tool window and open up the
Yeah, we can do that. But we should have like a menu to allow you to just build everything, so that you can at least every now and then just check and make sure that everything is there.
But it's more than that. It's having participate in refactoring.
Yeah. So there's a lot of features that for the variants people that we just need to add. Like refactoring, when you change the class and you have two versions of that class in different flavors, we need to be able to have the refactoring act on both of those classes. it's going to be a lot of work to adapt to Studio because, as I was saying, I think GDG has no concept of bind. So that will come one day. Hopefully not too far from now. Well, the memory on the device, the storage is limited, right? So Logcat only keeps a certain amount of time. So it's a circular buffer, which basically you have a certain buffer, and when you get to the end, you just start again and you overwrote what you wrote like X second or minute ago. When you do any Logcat, though, because we just dump that in your terminal, we just dump everything. So if you keep it connected for like now, you will have a full hour of Logcat. And then if you unplug it and replug it and redo an ADB Logcat, you get only the last X minutes or whatever your circular buffer content. It's just, devices that have limited memory. The Logcat is always in memory. We don't want to take too much, and we don't want to run out of memory. That's why it's limited and it's only the last. I mean, depending if you have an app that outputs a ton of stuff in your Logcat, you're going to actually have not that much in terms of time. But if you don't have that much, you'll have more. Any other question? All right. We will move on to.
Everybody
Okay, so we had this link outside beforehand, and a bunch of people signed up. And if you haven't, well, if you haven't by now, sorry. Oh, there's some more. All right. Everybody sign up? Everyone? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. There. Yeah, that's a mouse. There. Yeah. I lost my browser tab. Sorry. All right, let me try this one more time. Okay, and we have, we'll just let you guys come and pick them. We have Programming Android. That's the biggest book. We have Designing Multi-Device Experiences.